Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a simple fabric flower. I'm going to show you a way to make these that doesn't involve any glue or glue guns or plastic-based products. These come together just with cotton fabric and a needle and a thread. So let's go. In order to make a fabric flower, you just need a few simple things, and obviously the main piece to think about is the fabric that is going to form the flower. And I like to use thin scraps of fabric that are anywhere from 2 to 4 inches wide. Obviously, the wider your fabric, the wider your flower petals are going to be. And the longer your strips of fabric, the more petals you'll have to wrap around to make your flower. I would recommend using having at least 30 inches of fabric to make the flower. I'm also using some scraps of canvas cotton fabric to serve as the base for the flower. This way it'll have just a little bit of stiffness to sew the flower petals onto. But if you don't have canvas, you could definitely use a regular lightweight cotton poplin or quilting cotton. You're also going to need a needle and thread, and you're probably going to want a thimble for a little bit of hand sewing. And finally, if you have pinking shears, I would definitely pull those out for this project. But if you don't, that is okay. Pinking shears, of course, have the little teeth and they help your fabric not fray over time. The first step is to fold your fabric in half lengthwise and sew it into a long, thin tube. And you also want to fold over the short end before you sew your tube closed so that you have a nice finished edge at the first short end and at your other short end. You want to have a nice folded finished end on both ends of your tube. All right, at the machine, I'm going to sew my tube shut with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you don't really need to back stitch at the beginning. You can just go straight down. Next, I'm going to take 2 pieces of canvas and sew them together in a small circle shape. Again, if you don't have cotton canvas, you could definitely use a couple of layers of cotton poplin. I'm just going to make my way around in a sort of free-form circle shape here. It doesn't have to be super precise. And I'm just gently pulling on the fabric to make it turn in a circle. Now that I have a circle, I'm going to use my pinking shears to trim the extra fabric away from the circle shape. And this just helps the fabric not fray over time. But if you don't have pinking shears, you could just trim your seam allowance with regular scissors. And of course, I'm going to save my tiny scraps. I always save my scraps, and I like to have a little bin on my work table that holds them for future projects. Now it's time for a little hand sewing. I definitely don't do very much hand sewing. I prefer to sew on the machine. It's so much faster. But for this project, you really have to hand sew. And it's kind of a nice way to slow down. Hopefully you can find a little moment in your day to slow down and hand sew every now and then. And of course, starting the needle can be practice in patience. Okay, once I have probably a couple of feet of thread here, I'm going to trim it or cut it off the spool, and then I'm going to tie these 2 ends of the thread together in a couple of little overhand knots. Okay, now we are going to attach the tube that we made onto the circle that we made, and you just want to start close to the outer edge, and we're going to be folding the fabric onto itself and just sort of wrapping it around as we sew it in place with the needle and thread. All right, so I'll show you how I get started here. I am just putting the first corner edge here of my flower fabric, and I'm going to be sewing through the bottom side of my circle. And I really want to try to get my stitches to be pretty close to the machine stitches. So once I get that needle through, I'm going to grab the fabric and just kind of fold it onto itself about 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to go back through the fabric with the needle and come on out the other side. Oops. Okay. And then again, I just kind of am folding a little bit of fabric over. You don't want it to be too perfect because you want it to look kind of like a natural flower. And I'm just going to keep folding and stitching. And this is where I'll want to get my thimble on because it will start to get a bit thicker as I sew. And as I sew the fabric onto my little circle, I'm trying to spiral it so that it's going to be curving around a little bit inside from this outer edge so that we get a spiral effect going towards the center. As I get near the center, I'm just making my circle tighter and tighter so that I can eventually cover up all of the stitches. Okay, I've sewn most of my tube onto my circle, and what I have left is about 1 inch of loose fabric. So when you have just 1 inch of loose fabric left, you want to fold the fabric so that you hide the stitches. So you're folding the stitches to the back, and then you are bringing this last corner to the middle so that you are only going to have one or two visible stitches that are connecting this last little bit to the middle of your flower. So I've got my needle at the back of the flower. I'm going to come through the center. And again, you're definitely going to need a thimble for this part because there are a lot of layers. So I'm coming through that folded over edge. Just take your time and get that needle through because it's a little bulky. Okay, I finally got the needle through. I don't know how well you can see it there. I got the needle through the center. I'm just going to bring it all the way up and through. Something grippy would be good here too. Okay, and then we're just gonna stitch down this last little bit, again, right towards the center. So we just have one little visible stitch. And if you use a coordinating thread, the stitch is even less visible. No one's gonna notice. But we're just gonna have that one little stitch there and pull it through. And then we'll just tie the knot in the back. Once you finish sewing the fabric into the flower shape, you could sew your piece of canvas onto a barrette or onto a headband. You could attach a little bit of elastic on here if you want to be able to slide it on and off a headband or barrette, or it's ready to attach to whatever you want. Sew it onto your shirt, make a brooch out of it. It's good to go. I hope this flower project helps you tackle your scrap fabric pile. And if you're looking for more projects for scraps of fabric, I'm going to link to another video right here.